through Friday or maybe the weekend. So we have time to study, because we're gonna have to move on, which kinda sucks, but we're not learning any new blood group stuff. We'll start talking about antibody IDs. So this test will be the ABO, RH, and then the other antigens, the other blood group antigens. Where are the antigens? On the red blood cells. Antibodies are in the plasma or the serum. And so the way this chapter, the way the PowerPoint is lined out, we talk about the antigens of the group, like this, it's broken up into blood groups. Talk about the antigens first, and then the antibodies. So the antibodies are what we're trying to detect when we're doing the antibody identification. And so it talks about the antigens, and then you have to switch gears, because it talks about the antibody, and then it talks about the next one. Okay, so the other blood group systems, HLAs, which we won't talk a whole lot about, and platelet antigens. We'll talk a little bit about that. Not much. Even if my paper touches this thing, it knows it. Okay, the Kell blood group system is first. It's similar to the RH system. It's the second most immunogenic, so the most likely to cause you to make an antibody after D. So D is the most immunogenic, Kell is second. There's two major antigens in this group. The big K, on the blood bank guy, he says not to call it Kell, he called it K, what did he call it, K1 or whatever he was calling it. When in Rome.
Big K.
Yeah, did he call it Big K? He did call it Big K. So I've never heard anybody say that before. My disadvantage is I've only worked in one place. So when in Rome, when you're in the blood bank, wherever you're at, just, you'll hear them call it whatever they call it what they call it. And that's how it is. Less than 9% of the population is Kell positive, so big K positive. And then the little k, which is called Chelano, I've heard it called Chelano and Solano. We're gonna call it Chelano. More than 90% of the population is little k positive. That means they have the antigen. So big K and little k antigens are antithetical. Most of these blood bank antigens are. They're well developed at birth, which is why they can cause HDFN. And it's very immunogenic, so second to D. So if you read the chapter, you've heard some of this already, or read some of it. So red cells have more than 300 unique antigens. So that's just the ones they've discovered so far. So there are 36 blood group systems that have been discovered. We're only going to learn about the ones that are on that anagram, the most important ones. What are the two most important blood groups? ABO and RH. So the Kell blood group system was discovered in 1946 in a case of HDFN. In a patient, her name was Kelleher, K-E-L-L-E-H-E-R, and so it just stuck with the Kell for the name. Most of these blood group systems are named after the person who helped come up with it. So it was an interesting story. Her baby had HDFN, and I can't remember the rest of the story, but they say that 1 in 10 people that get exposed to the Kell antigen, if they're Kell negative, will make an antibody. So that's a lot. Oh, and the little k, they say that 90% of the population, more than 90%, it's like 99%. So if you look at your anagram, you'll be lucky, I don't know, but you'll be lucky if you have a single little k negative cell on that panel, because almost everybody's little k positive. So for making antibodies, that means almost nobody's gonna make an antibody. I've never seen one, you may not ever see one, because if most people have the antigen, they're not gonna make antibodies. Other Kell antigens. So there are 7 sets of high and low frequency antigens in the Kell system. So if you look at your anagram, Kell is the one we're going to worry about the most. So the antigens are analogous to the RH system, so the way that they are on the genes. KPA antigens, so So one is low frequency, one is high frequency, so almost nobody has the antigen, so nobody's getting exposed to it through transfusion. And then KPV is high frequency, so almost everybody has it, and so nobody's gonna make the antibody to it. So those, I've never seen one of those in real life. Is it on your anagram? KP? Y'all, anybody have one?
That's on the anagram.
Yeah, on the anagram, the paper that showed the, like the antibody panel that has the 10 cells on it. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. Anyways, I can't remember if it's on there.
Like the category?
Yeah, so it'll be around the KL system. Is KPA and KPB on there? Yeah. And so they're on there, but they're not very common as far as antibodies go. The JS antigens, so the JSA, 20% of black people have the antigen, 0.1% of white people have it. JSB is a high frequency antigen, almost everybody has it. So I have seen a JSA in a sickle cell patient. Finding blood for him was pretty hard to do. We had to order it. And that was not his only antibody, so he had other antibodies too. Okay, so say a patient has a JSB, which is high frequency, that means almost everybody has the antigen, right? So this is a question that may be on the test. So everybody that's gonna have surgery that could possibly need a blood product will, if it's an elective surgery, like in a surgery where you go get your lab work done, and then you come back next week to have your surgery, that means elective, like something you signed up for, not something that you're having as an emergency. So, everybody that has any chance, and there's a list of procedures in the AABB technical manual that require a type and screen, there's some that require type and cross match, and so many units, 3, 6, 2, whatever, however many units that the AABB says, and then your hospital, if you do surgeries, will have a surgery committee, and then they make their own policy saying, for hysterectomies, just gonna do a type and screen, for hip replacements, we'll do a type and screen and cross match 2 units, and so there's a policy that says what they think you should do, and so just like, so you know how it works. Say a patient, so 80 to 90% of people are JSB positive, which means finding JSB negative blood is hard to do. So this patient's coming in for surgery next week. Why do you think they have their blood bank work done so far ahead of time?
They're probably JSA.
If they have an antibody and you need to order blood from the blood center, you need to have time to do it. So he comes in for an elective surgery type and screen, and you discover that he has an anti-JSB. What do you think the best approach would be to find compatible blood for him would be?
Family.
Look at his family, or you can contact the rare donor registry.
Can he not donate to himself?
Not if his surgery is next week. But yes, so there are some doctors that I've seen it done, and it costs money, the patient has to pay for it. And to donate to yourself, that's called an autologous donation, you have to have a doctor's order. So say the doctor, you're having I've only seen it done in orthopedic surgeries. And so, and you remember you can only donate like every 56 days, I think. So you have to, and then the shelf life of blood, I think they may shorten the window a little bit if you're gonna have an autologous surgery, but there's lots of rules. Your H&H has to be a certain level, because you don't wanna drop their H&H right before surgery. And so there's lots of rules that they have to follow. So you have to have a doctor's order, it costs money, it takes time. So a lot of people will just quit doing it, but I have seen it done before. And so they'd go to the blood center, donate their unit, they still do all of the testing for it, but the patient is the only person that can receive that unit. So if they don't need it in surgery, which is what you kind of hope for, then it gets thrown away at the expiration date. And so when it comes in, it'll have their name on it, you'll put it in the computer with all these special things that, like, it's just barcodes, and you'll scan it in. And when the doctor puts the order in for the other type of screen on the day of surgery, so they'll repeat the workup, because the cross match is only good for 3 days, right? So they have to do another type and screen at least. They'll usually put a note in, patient has autologous blood. They wanna make sure that you don't give them any other kind of blood if they've donated to themselves. Okay, so to find compatible blood. You could look at their family. Or contact the rare donor registry. That's the two things you could do. And that's for anybody that has a antibody to a high frequency antigen. Got it? I got it. Did you have a question?
No, I was
Oh, yes, Shanima.
Oh. What?
Oh, there's one thing I wanted to tell you. So write down the difference in the high frequency and the low frequency, because people get it confused. So high frequency, and we're talking about the antigens. What does high frequency mean?
Occurs a lot.
Yep, everybody has it. Almost everybody has it. We're talking about antigens. Low frequency, almost nobody has it. So almost nobody has the antigen. And so if everybody has the antigen, then nobody's making antibodies to it. If nobody has the antigen, then nobody's getting exposed to it. So either way, you're not gonna see antibodies very commonly for these high and low frequency antigens. But if you do, if it's a high frequency, it's gonna be hard to find blood, compatible blood, if somebody has the antibody. Okay, KEL antigens have disulfide bonded regions on the glycoproteins. And so we're not gonna go too crazy with the structure of these antigens. But this makes them sensitive to sulfhydryl reagents, and so it destroys the KEL antigen. Don't confuse these sulfhydryl reagents with enzymes. KEL is not sensitive to enzymes. So this DTT is the only one I've ever really had experience with. And if we saw somebody that had pan-reactivity that was on a certain drug, and pan-reactivity means everything's positive. If everything's positive, you can't rule anything out. So, this drug is what they use for, remember I talked about the people with multiple myeloma, they use the anti-CD38 that causes the blood bank problems. And so, at the reference lab, they will use this drug to get rid of, so that the anti-CD38 attaches to the red blood cells, and it's gotta be IgG, I guess, and it makes everything positive. So when you go through the AHG phase, everything reacts, because it does have that antibody attached to the cells, the red cells. And so they use this drug to dissociate that antibody from the red cells so that they can see if there's any underlying antibodies. Because that is a cancer patient, it's likely that they'll be transfused, so they could have been making an antibody that's hiding underneath the drug that's attached to their cells. And so they'll use this drug. So, I mean, it's not an enzyme, it's like a reagent. So kale is sensitive to this. But don't confuse these sulfhydryl reagents with enzymes. And we're gonna talk more about enzymes. So KAL 0 or KAL null phenotypes is when you lack all the KAL system antigens. And those people express a related KX antigen. And as a result, the red blood cell immune stimulation, KAL 0, is that how the blood bank guy said it? I've never seen this before. KAL 0 individuals can make an anti-KU. So KU is on red cells that have KAL antigen. So people that are KAL null can make extra antibodies that people that have some of the KAL antigens won't make. And that is not common. So KAL genetics, we're not gonna go crazy with KAL genetics, but you can see that 91% of the population, of the white population is KAL negative, 98% of the black population is KAL negative. So finding blood, so the likelihood of somebody making an antibody is not huge, because people aren't getting exposed to it, but it's so immunogenic, that's why you see so many of them. But finding blood is really easy to do, because most people are KAL negative. Negative. Say again. So this one, we're just talking about the big K right now. So most people are KAL negative, little k positive.
I just thought the height.
Oh, my bad. So no, that means negative. So what does that make KAL high or low frequency? Low. Because most people are KAL negative. So that makes this one high. Almost everybody has this one, almost nobody has that one. So it takes time for that to make sense in your head. That's why we keep talking about it. KAL antibodies. So we've been talking about the antigens, now we're going to talk about the KAL antibodies. So they are mostly IgG. They're red cell stimulated, so it either happens through transfusion or pregnancy, you have to get exposed to it. They agglutinate best in the IAT, the indirect antiglobulin test, as do all of the IgG antibodies, right? That's at warm, so 37 degrees. They usually do not bind complement. Which ones bind complement the best? IgG or IgM? IgM. So they don't bind complement because they're IgG. They are associated with hemolytic transfusion reactions and HDFN. They have no effect when treated with enzymes. So remember, they are sensitive to those sulfhydryl reagents. They are not affected by enzymes. You need to know that. An anti-big K is the most common. So there may be a question about this on the test. They are not affected by enzymes. So we use enzymes for difficult antibody workups. And so if you think there's multiple antibodies and there's one that's affected by enzymes in the way, you can use an enzyme panel. So most of the panels you get in the blood bank have two sets of red cells. Some of them are treated with enzymes and some of them are not. And there'll be different colored tops, by the way, like that's how you'll know the difference. And usually Physin is the most common that I have seen. And so you can use that enzyme panel, and if that part goes away, then you can see what else is there. And you're just gonna have to see that in real life for it to really make sense. But the KAL antigens, since they're well developed at birth, that's how the HDFN happens. So a lot of these red cell antigens are not well developed at birth. It takes time for them to really start showing up. But you have a bunch of KAL antigens on your red cells when you're born, if you're KAL positive. So if mama's KAL negative and she starts making an antibody, that's when the HDFN happens. Because it's so immunogenic. So the KX blood group system is phenotypically related to KALE, but it's not genetically similar. So it just looks the same. So individuals who lack the KX antigen may demonstrate red cell abnormalities, which is usually acanthocytosis. So remember acanthocytes, the little spiky ones, irregular spikes? And so those are red blood cells that are acanthocytes, they have irregular spicules. So individuals who lack the KX antigen has the red cell abnormalities, that's called the McLeod phenotype. And it's seen in males because it's inherited on the X chromosome. So remember, oh, the next slide talks about it, we do talk about it. The chronic granulomatous disease. That happens in people with the McLeod phenotype. So the McLeod syndrome, McLeod phenotype, I guess it causes the McLeod syndrome. And so they have red cell abnormalities, muscular and neurologic defects, and increased CK. And that's a lab that you run all the time in chemistry. So it's associated with chronic granulomatous disease. And remember those, we talked about that in hematology, those people have impaired phagocytosis. So their white blood cells engulfs the bacteria, but it can't kill it. Remember talking about that vaguely? So remember that girl I found on Instagram I told you about that has it? She had all kinds of skin problems, she had all kind of problems.
Is that the one that lost both her legs?
No, that's the one, like, she got meningitis.
You showed us a lot.
I know. So they make those pages to raise awareness because a lot of people have never heard of some of this stuff. And so that helps get money for the treatments and, therapy and stuff like that. Because the stuff that's not common, they don't spend a lot of money trying to fix it. And so I guess that's why they do it. All right, we're switching to Duffy. Oh, and the way this happens, the reason this red blood cell phenotype is attributed to these red cell problems, they haven't figured out why yet. They don't know why it happens. Just fun fact. The Duffy blood group system. So the antigens are well developed at birth. They are destroyed by enzymes. And so there's a little poem, I guess, in the purple and yellow book. And if you don't have it yet, I'll put it on the board at the end. Don't forget, that's why I brought the book. That shows you how to remember which ones are destroyed by enzymes. Duffy is one of them. So the main ones are Duffy A and Duffy B. They're codominant alleles. Almost all of the blood groups that antigens are. And these are the two that are most important for transfusion purposes, A and B, Duffy A and B. So there's 5 antigens in this group, and you don't have to know that. The only 2 that we're gonna worry about are these 2, and that's the ones that are on your anagram. Duffy antibodies. So there's Duffy A, which is notated by FYA and FYB. So Duffy A and B antibodies, they're IgG. They don't bind complement, probably because they're IgG. They're stimulated by transfusion or pregnancy, but they're not a common cause of HDFN. And they do not react with enzyme-treated cells. They are destroyed by enzymes. I would write that down.
Can you repeat what you said again?
They do not react with enzyme-treated cells. So the way I like to say it is they're destroyed by enzymes. So I read in the book that I either read it in the book or the Blood Bank I said it. I think I read it in the book. That 50% of the anti-Duffy A's do bind complement. maybe they, I don't know, let's just say no, let's just say they don't. So to keep it from getting confused. They're still discovering stuff and figuring out things that they thought were right were wrong, so we're just going with what we know now. The Duffy system and malaria. So most African Americans are Duffy A and B negative. Certain malarial parasites like Plasmodium, I don't know how to say that, and Plasmodium vivax will not invade Duffy A and B negative cells. So Duffy A and B, the antigens, react as a receptor for the merozoite that attaches to the red blood cell. So you know how malaria invades the red blood cell? Well, Duffy A and B helps it. If you don't have those antigens, it's kind of like they won't let them in. So the Duffy A and B negative phenotype is frequently found in people from West and Central Africa, supporting the theory of selective evolution. So they think this is an evolution thing, and this is just because I'm always thinking in my head about stuff that I probably shouldn't do right now. But, so if this was part of evolution for the malaria thing, but we have babies that are born to Rh negative moms, that would, if we didn't have RhoGAM, our babies would still be dying today if we didn't have RhoGAM and the babies were Rh positive, right? And the moms were Rh negative, because D is so immunogenic. So why did that part of selective evolution not fix that problem? Like malaria is treatable, but those babies dying, I don't even know. I don't even know. That's one of the questions that I probably will have for the rest of my life. But, I don't know, I was just sitting there reading one day and thinking, why, if we fixed that, why?
Maybe
Why are we
it's
still feeling
because
our
it's
babies?
environmental versus genetic.
Maybe that's a selection. I don't know, I just don't understand. But that's just the way the world.
Maybe you should go back to the old panel and just start saying these things out of small.
Maybe, a lot of people, they blame everything on the government. A lot of stuff is probably the government's fault, but that's also a topic for another day. So, is this what you did already? Yes. So the kid blood group system, there are 3 antigens, JKA, JKB, and JK3. So these are the 2 that we're really worried about. They're the ones that are on your anagram. So if you have your anagram out, especially when we're doing the antibody ID chapter, which is the next one, keep it out so you can get used to looking at it and seeing what's on it. In the United States, most blacks are 51% JKA positive, B negative. And most Caucasians are 50% JKA and B positive. JK3 is present whenever those 2 are present, JKA. Kid null phenotype, so if you're JKA and B negative, is usually seen in individuals from the Far East or Pacific Islands. It's rare, those are the people that can make that anti-JK3. So if it's rare, that's why we're not really worried about it here. So this was the 9th blood group system that was identified in 1951. So really, that's not that long ago. And it was discovered in the plasma of Mrs. Kidd, and the antibody caused HDFN in her baby. It was a little boy. And so what do you think his initials were? Who read? His initials were JK. And so I think that's kind of fun. So they named it after her baby. They do show dosage. That is important. That will be important forever. They show dosage. Bad. And they're enhanced by enzymes. The kid antibodies. So we're only really worried about JKA and JKB, anti-JKA and JKB. They're IgG. They are clinically significant. They may bind complement. I think they said how much, there's a certain percentage of the antibodies that can be IgG They are implicated in hemolytic transfusion reactions and HDFN. Usually the hemolytic transfusion reactions are delayed. So common cause of delayed hemolytic transfusion reactions. They usually appear with other antibodies, so they're not very immunogenic. So if somebody's a responder, we call it a responder, the people that make antibodies. Some people don't, they don't make any. I don't think they know why. Some people make them and some people don't. Detection is aided by enzymes, LIS and PEG. I mean, we use LIS and PEG for all of the IgG antibodies. So they're enhanced by enzymes. So the reasons these KID antibodies are so important is because they have weak reactivity in the tubes, so they're hard to detect. Sometimes they're undetectable. So if you don't have a history of the patient having that antibody, you won't pick it up, and then you can carry your cross-match all the way through Coombs and not know that something's wrong. And then they have a delayed hemolytic transfusion reaction because they're getting resensitized because they're antibodies. The antibodies will rise quickly, the titers, and then they can just go all the way away, which is kind of dangerous for people that's hospital hop. And so they can cause severe red cell destruction upon that second stimulation. So you'll think your patient doesn't have any antibodies because everything was negative, and then bam, you have a transfusion reaction. So that's why they call these the just kidding antibodies. Like you thought they didn't have an antibody, but they really did. The Lutheran blood group system, I've never seen a Lutheran antibody. They're not clinically significant, I don't think. There's 19 antigens. We're only worried about Lutheran A and B. They're weakly expressed on cord cells, so that means it doesn't cause HDFN. So when they're weakly expressed on the cord cells, you don't have any HDFN. Most are high incidence antigens. Antibodies are rare. And so I've never seen one. You may not see one. Nah, you don't. They're not affected by enzymes, but you don't even have to really worry about that if you're not even seeing them. Antibodies are not clinically significant. So the reason we need to have these ones that are not clinically significant on there is if it does show up, like you have a problem, maybe you won't know if you have a problem with your cross-match, that something was there. So if it picks it up, you know, you don't really have to worry about this one. And Lewis is kind of the same way. So they say they can occur without red cell stimulation. So I guess that means they're naturally occurring. They can be IgG and IgM, reacts best at room temperature, not clinically significant. And so I wouldn't worry about Lutheran too much. Antibodies are rare. The Lewis blood group system. So remember we talked about Lewis a little bit when we were talking about the ABO and the H. So the H thing because with the secretors. So Lewis antigens are found in secretions and in the plasma. The glycolipids are absorbed onto the red cell membrane. They're not clinically significant. So Lewis A and Lewis B are not alleles, so that makes them a little different than all the other blood group antigen genes. The Lewis system depends on the H, SE, and the Lewis genes. So the little LE, little h, and little se do not produce gene products. So if the LE gene, the big LE gene, is inherited, the Lewis A substance is produced. So you have to have the LE gene to make that Lewis substance. The LE, big H, and SE genes must all be inherited to convert Lewis A to Lewis B. and Lewis A and B positive red cells are rare. So they're not clinically significant. We'll talk about that in the antibody part. I'm not gonna ask you anything about the genes. So Lewis antibodies are produced by people that are Lewis A and B negative. They're IgM. They are not clinically significant. I saw somebody spend so much time worrying about a Lewis in a pregnant lady when it didn't even matter. Because you're gonna work with people that don't know as much as you think that they should. And so when I took the blood bank supervisor job, I was terrified that somebody was gonna ask me something that I didn't know. And my supervisor, the one that I was taking over for, said, one day you're gonna be standing here and you're gonna realize that you know more than everybody around you. And I just laughed, like, I don't see that happening. I mean, I was terrified. It wasn't a year, and then I was like, oh my goodness. I need to sit down and have class with all of y'all at the same time. Like, y'all forgot everything. I don't know, so, it really wasn't that bad, but things that you think that they should know that they forget, because if you don't see it all the time, and people that are generalists, say they work in blood bank once a week, they may miss the good stuff the good stuff is like antibody IDs, antibodies you've never seen before, because you've never seen this, this is like another language to you. Unless you see it, once you see it one time in real life, you're gonna be like, you'll never forget it. But the theory, it's like, what are you talking about? So, one day, it just comes with experience. You're not gonna know everything about blood bank when you leave here. So they're IgM, so agglutination can occur at immediate spin. When it occurs at 37 degrees and AHG, that's when it's annoying, because, if it goes away at AHG, then you really know you don't have to worry about it. But if it's still showing up, then it makes everybody nervous, like, I don't like that, because if it's showing up here, it's gonna show up in your cross match. So enzymes enhance them. Anti-Lewis A binds complement. It's an IgM, so it may cause hemolysis in vitro, so in the tube. And remember, hemolysis and agglutination is a positive reaction. So that's scary, that it just freaks you out. And there's a neutralization technique that can confirm the presence or eliminate reactions, which is really what you want to do, is not see them anymore, so it's not making you feel bad about your workup. So just remember, Lewis is almost never important. So the Lewis antigens are not fully developed at birth. They don't cross the placenta because they're IgM. So that right there should have told us not to spend so much time on that lady's workup, that pregnant lady's workup. So, okay, the big I and little I antigens. So they're not antithetical. They form on the precursor A, B, and H chains. Newborns have little I. Y'all seen this before, right? Adults have the big I. So we talked about this in hematology. So they start out with the little I antigen and it converts to big I around 2 years of age. And then they'll have the big I. So on cord cells, like why can't I remember what that's called? Umbilical cord. I never can. Cord cells are negative for big I, right? Because it's in babies, little I's in babies. The big I antibodies, they're cold reacting, IgM, they can bind complement. They're not clinically significant, it's usually an autoantibody, so they usually make an antibody to their own cells. Allo anti-I is rare, so you're not gonna get it from a transfusion or through pregnancy. Reactions are avoided by pre-warming, And so a pre-warm procedure, there'll be a procedure for that in the blood bank. And so you'll take your, your whole bottle of saline, you'll take it and put it in a bag or in an incubator or something and bring it to room temperature. And so you're gonna do a manual wash, you have a cell washer in the blood bank, but it's using a big box of saline that's on the counter. I think most of the hospitals have a cell washer, maybe not all of them.
I was surprised at how cold it was when you said.
Freezing. So the machines, that's mostly for the machines, and it still has to be within a range because there's little temperature gauges and humidity gauges all throughout the lab. So the humidity has to be right for some of the test procedures. The temperature has to be cold enough for the machines. If it gets too warm, your chemistry machines especially, they get angry. They will just quit working. And so you'll notice the temperature is they're strict about the temperature in the lab. It's usually cold. The pre-warm procedure, so you'll take a whole bottle of saline and just put it in a bag or something to keep water from getting in it, and you can put it down in the plasma bath. So it's this big block of water that's body temperature, and that's how you thaw out the frozen blood product plasma. And so you put your your saline bottle in there to warm up. You have a heat lock just like we have in the lab upstairs, and you'll put your tubes in there, your reagents, you'll go ahead and drop them in the tubes you're gonna use, put them in there, you let everything come to room temperature before you do your test. That way you avoid these, if you have one of these, that's how you get rid of it. So if you warm everything up, it's IgM and cold reacting, it will go away if you warm everything up. Now you can warm away a clinically significant antibody, so you just make sure you read the procedure, and if you understand, so if you get one of these and you've never seen one before, first thing you're gonna do is get the technical manual out, read about it, talk to the other people that you're working with or the supervisor, and they're gonna teach you what to do. You're not gonna do this by yourself the first time, but this is how you get rid of it. So the disease association, you do have to know this for the test, which you should really know already. So the auto-anti-I, or just the anti-big I, is caused by this, usually. And then the little I, the main one, is infectious mono. And so kids get mono, that's how you remember the little I. So this is in adults. And you see this one in kids. This one's usually from Mycoplasma pneumoniae. This one's usually from mono. Y'all remember that? So just know which disease causes which one. So if somebody has one of these anti-I antibodies, you don't have to find I negative blood for transfusion. It may be hard to find serologically compatible blood, so when you take it through the cross-match units that are compatible, because almost everybody has the anti-I. And so this is just annoying. But if you do the pre-warm, and just hope it goes away. So the P1 PK blood group system. The P1 antigen is detected in plasma and hydatid cyst fluid. Does anybody know what a hydatid cyst fluid, hydatid cyst is? So it's like a cyst that they can be in your brain. I mean, they can get really big too. They can be on your liver. It's from some kind of tapeworm. And so who took the fluid out of one of those cysts and tested it for this? But it's weird, right? I don't know how that, I always wonder how did they figure that out? I don't know, weird. So it's a globicide blood group, it's the P antigen, and then these other antigens, I wouldn't worry about those, I've never heard of them. They're high frequency, almost everybody has it. So I've never seen a real anti-P. But it is on the P1 is on your anagram, if anybody has it in front of them. So if you get one of these, you're just gonna have to read about it. The technical manual is the blood bank Bible. In your downtime, read it. You'll learn, like if you're working on DATs, read the DAT chapter. It's very short, it's like maybe 1 page. Very easy to understand. So this one is the one that we've talked about before. Remember, that's the Doneth-Landsteiner antibody, and it causes this paroxysmal cold hemoglobinuria. hemoglobinuria, TCH, Donovan Landsteiner. If you can remember that, you'll be able to answer the questions. And it's anti-P is the antibody. Auto anti-P usually. But if you can just remember anti-P, TCH, Donovan Landsteiner, that's what you need to know here. So it's biphasic, so it can bind to P1 or P2 cells at low temperatures before the complement is activated. It can happen in children after a viral infection. And so these people, they're at body temperature, they get cold, and it usually happens in their extremities. In their extremities. So right now, we're all at body temperature. Say it's freezing cold outside, they go outside, they get cold. What's the first thing that gets cold? Your hands and your feet. And so once you start warming back up, then the complement starts lysing, it gets activated, and then it starts causing this hemolysis because of this auto anti-P, the Donovan Landsteiner antibody. So that's how it works. So those people should not live in a cold area. And if it's cold, like I worked with somebody that had Raynaud's, and I don't know what exactly was wrong with her, but she wore gloves, white gloves, like Mr. White, I heard Mr. White did too, but he did that because he had a skin problem. She did it so she wouldn't get cold, so she usually wore her scrubs, a lab coat that she bought over top of that, and a big lab coat, like a disposable one on top of that, to stay warm. She had long socks and those gloves on top of her blue gloves. So she never wanted to get cold. And if she did, you could literally see the tips of her fingers would turn blue. So I don't know if she had this, maybe. So it's associated with an autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So that's when the complement gets activated. It doesn't happen when they get cold, it happens when they start warming back up. So this is what you need to know.
Isn't that what got cold?
He had polar gluten disease.
Oh, that's what it was.
I don't remember what caused it, but that's what he had. I think it might be similar. Okay, the NNS blood group system. Do y'all want to take a break? Are y'all sleepy? Let's take a little break. We are at least having. It's just for practice. Okay, so the NNS blood group system. N and N are coded by glycophorin A, big S, little s, and U. So U, I did go get my anagram. U is not on there, but we're gonna talk about U. They show dosage. So the important things here is they show dosage. S also shows dosage, probably not as bad as M and N. M and N are bad about showing dosage. If you're homozygous, if you have homozygous cells, that shows up better. Like that's what dosage means, right? We'll talk about it again. So big S, little s, and U. So what you need to know about this is you can make big S, little s negative people can make a U. If you're big S and little s negative, you're usually U negative. So I didn't remember that. I don't know if I never learned it the first time or the second time I went to school. I don't know, but I read about it in the technical manual. Once I got one, I saw one. I did see one in real life. So I would just put that in the back of your mind. Big S, little s negative people can make an anti-U. So anti-M can be IgM and IgG. Let's just say IgG. So IgM. And so when they react at cold temperatures. If they go away, when you take it through the AHG phase, then it was just IgM. If it doesn't go away, which is not common, but it can happen, then you would assume it's probably IgG. If it goes away, oh. If it goes away, when you warm your tubes up, when you incubate, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to find M negative blood, because when you're gonna do a full cross match, it's gonna go away. If it doesn't go away, then just find some M negative units. That's the worst thing that can happen. N is rare, is IgM. There's some N-like antibodies that are found in dialysis patients from formaldehyde sterilized instruments. I've never seen an N, you may not either, but it can happen in these dialysis patients. Which I didn't know until I read about it in the technical manual.
Is it because of the formaldehyde? Like,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah, so it's like, people that have dialysis usually have it like at least 3 times a week. And so they're getting exposed to it over and over again, and they'll make this antibody to this, I guess this formaldehyde. I don't know. It's weird, right? It's weird. Anti-M can occur naturally, be naturally occurring. And so remember, that's one of the ones I told you about if you have reactions in your reverse, so you're using those reagent red cells for the patient's plasma, and you're doing a reverse at immediate spin, it's a cold. So if the patient has an anti-M and M is present on those reagent red cells, it can cause reactivity in your reverse that's not supposed to be there. So to fix that, you could antigen type the red cells, the reagent red cells, or the anti-A or the anti-B, the A1 cells or the B cells. You could phenotype those, so using some IgM and a serum, and your patient at the same time. If the patient's M negative and the red cells are M positive, then the patient might have an anti-M. So that's the way you can investigate. So N is mostly just annoying. So the main one I want you to look at here is U. So you have to be S negative, big S negative, little s negative to make you U. These people are also U negative. And so they can make anti-U. So 99.9% of people are U positive. 99% of black people are U positive. So how hard do you think it is to find blood for somebody with an anti-U?
Not very easy.
Very. It can be impossible.
You said he's
So this, how many can make, how hard is it to find U negative blood? I have no idea what I said, but that's what I meant. Very hard. So you might as well just call this 100%. You're not gonna find it in a white person. Whoop, I'm gonna die. You're not gonna find it from a white person. The likelihood you're gonna find it from a black person, pretty slim. It's gonna be really hard to do. You're gonna have to contact the rare donor registry if one of these people needs blood. Oh, it's so expensive. Probably gonna be frozen. And so the way they freeze blood, if you froze just regular blood, it's gonna hemolyze as soon as you thaw it out. It's not gonna work. So they add this glycerol solution to the red cells, and it makes it where they can freeze them, and it has to be frozen at negative like 100. I don't know, super, like really deep freeze. And then they'll bring it back to room temperature, wash the cells with this special cell washing machine and it removes the glycerol, like it's a process. That's what makes it expensive. Units that have been frozen and thawed out have a expiration date of like 24 hours or something. So say you're doing it in, I don't know, up north somewhere, and you need it here at this hospital, well, it's gonna have to come on a plane, and so the expiration time starts from when they're finished washing it. And so getting it to you in time for you to do your cross match and all that stuff, and then getting it transfused to the patient within 24 hours, That's why it's expensive. It's expensive. So. So it's also not easy to find little s negative blood. Most people are little s positive. So if you look at your anagram, when does yours expire? Which one did I give you? Does anybody have it out? Free? You see the expiration date in the top left?
Twenty-two.
Yeah, 22. Okay, yeah. So that's the one I have too. We have new ones upstairs with the panels that I ordered. So look at big S. So it's under the MN group. You see it close to the end. There are two out of these 10 people are S negative. And so most people are little s positive, little s if I meant. So the plus sign means the patient has that antigen. Most people are little s positive. So the patient that had a U, we ran an antibody screen and an antibody panel. Every single cell was positive. So what do you think we were thinking it was? We thought it was an autoantibody. You know what we didn't do? An autocontrol. The autocontrol tells you if you have an autoantibody. And this is a little bit off topic, but it's something that you need to know. And we'll talk about it when we're talking about antibody ID, which is the next chapter. If you think you have an autoantibody, do an autocontrol. What do you think the sample is for that? You use the patient's red cells? And the patient's plasma. So you would add 1 drop of the patient's red cell suspension, 2 drops of their plasma, mix it together and spin it down, read it at immediate spin, incubate it, carry it through AHG, wash it, read it again after you add the anti-IgG reagent. And then if it was negative, you would add your check cells. If it was negative, you probably have an allo antibody. If it's positive, auto antibody. So you're using the patient's red cells, patient's plasma, right? You mix it together and the patient is reacting, they're reacting to their own self because all you added was their red cells and their plasma together. I don't know why we didn't do it. Nobody knew, nobody remembered. I don't know why we didn't do it. We forgot, we didn't do it. So we just sent it to the reference lab and it came back as an anti-U. And we all thought it was just so cool. Like, so we got the technical manual out, we read about it. But if we would have done an auto control, we would have known that it wasn't an autoantibody, that it was a real antibody. And so the physician kept calling for blood, and we kept telling them they had to wait. But we really thought it was an autoantibody, not a real antibody. Well, the reference lab did an auto control, and it was a real antibody. If we would have transfused, because we just thought it was an autoantibody, it would have been hemolytic. It would have been a hemolytic transfusion reaction. Because that's the kind of stuff that you don't know until you do it. We just didn't know. It would have been bad. So read the technical manual. So these are miscellaneous blood group systems. So if you send something to the reference lab for a phenotype, you're gonna get answers back for all of these blood groups. I wouldn't worry about those blood groups until you see, I've never had to worry about any of these, none of them. So when your results come back from the reference lab and they've done a molecular test and phenotyped them for all that stuff, at least you know you've heard of it before. They're not gonna ask you this hard stuff on your boards. Avail, I have seen Avail. And so look at your anagram. So Avail is not that common. Look at cell number 4. You see out to the left side, there's a V plus. So that one cell right there is vel positive. I didn't make front and back copies of this. So there's extended phenotypings on the back of one of these. Nobody explained this to me either. I had no idea that that meant anything to me. So all these weird antigens, and if y'all want an anagram just to keep in your notebook that has a copy of the front and back, I'll make you one. But all these antigens, if they've tested them before, the donor that they used to make these red cells, they'll write it out to the side, so you'll know that what is so they've done a molecular phenotype on these donors that donated to make this reagent, right? So if you had a really weird reaction on only one cell, and you can't figure out what it is, you can look back here and see what it could be, maybe. You're probably still gonna have to send it to the reference lab if you only have one cell, but that's what this means. So just so you've seen it before. The really uncommon stuff, which is what this is, well, some of it will be on. Okay, HLA, we're almost done. HLA, what's it stand for? Man. Human leukocyte antigens. And so leukocytes, those are white blood cells, right? So they're found on leukocytes and tissue cells. The HLA antibodies are produced as a result of transfusion or pregnancy, so by exposure. Antibodies have been associated with refractoriness and transfusion reactions. So refractoriness is, say you get a unit of platelets, and your platelet count stays the same. So it's supposed to go up by 10,000, I think, every unit of platelets that you get. So the patient's been getting platelets, say they are a cancer patient, they have to get platelets regularly. Well, they get a few units, platelet count goes up every time, and then it quits going up. They get a unit, and you do a platelet count, and it didn't go up at all. Well, that may mean they're refractory, which means they've made an antibody, an HLA antibody, to these certain HLA antigens that are on the platelets, and their immune system is just taking the platelets out of circulation. And so it's like attacking them. So it doesn't cause a hemolytic problem because it's not a red cell, there's no hemoglobin, but it just gets rid of them. Your body gets rid of them. HLA testing is used to assess risk factors for disease susceptibility. And so ankylosing spondylitis and celiac disease are two of the diseases. I read that in textbook because I want to know what diseases, like, it helps me remember. You give me a little bit more information. And then they use it for matching for organs, so solid organs, kidneys, hearts. And this is a hematopoietic progenitor cell transplant, so stem cell transplants. Stem cells. I don't think I asked you much about that. I'll tell you what you need to know. So the genes that code for the HLA antigens are part of the MHC. Y'all remember what that stands for? For micro? That's probably where you talked about it. So the major histocompatibility. major histocompatibility complex. So the MHC genes are divided into 3 classes. Class 1 is on platelets, white blood cells, and nucleated cells. Class 2 is on macrophages, dendritic cells, and B cells, and class 3 codes for complement and cytokines. You get one haplotype, or one set of closely linked genes from each parent. And the antigens are named with a letter followed by a number. You don't have to know any of that. So, you know, for all these genes, you get one from each parent, right? So on the news this morning, I've never watched the news, but I heard it, when I turned the TV on, it was still on my little satellite. Y'all know I live in the middle of nowhere. Not satellite, antenna. I have an antenna. Okay, so my husband must have been trying to watch the football game on there yesterday. And they were talking about sickle cell disease. I don't know what they were talking about, but I heard it when I was making snakes. And he said something about to actually have the disease, you have to get 2 sets of genes from each parent, which was wrong. And I was walking around the kitchen and I was like, that's wrong. So the more you learn, you're gonna listen to people talk and be like, that's not right, but okay, whatever. So it just makes you feel smart. Like, yeah, that's not how it works. You don't have to know anything about the inheritance patterns, you don't have to know that. Or that. Okay, antibody detection and identification. So matching HLAs in patients with existing antibodies is important for graft survival. Patients may become sensitized to these human leukocyte antigens by pregnancy, blood transfusions, or previous transplants. That could be a stem cell transplant, organ transplant. And so just some fun facts that you don't have to know. 30 to 50% of women that have had 3 or more pregnancies have HLA antibodies. Sometimes they last for just a few weeks or a few months. Sometimes they can last for years. 50% of people who received multiple transfusions develop HLA antibodies. Now that we're using leukoreduced blood, so blood that they try to take most of the white blood cells out of, it's not as bad as it used to be. But before they leukoreduced blood, which they didn't always, so the number's probably lower now than it used to be. And with transplants, 90% of people with a failed transplant, so if they start getting graft versus host disease, 90% of those people, within 2 weeks of the failure, they make antibodies, HLA antibodies. So they're important in transfusion and pregnancy, transplants. So how do you think, if you had somebody that was getting transfused all the time, and you wanted to prevent this, they say they were a candidate, transplant candidate. So cancer patient, let's say they were a HPC candidate, so a stem cell candidate. The more HLA antibodies they make, the harder it's gonna be to find a match for them. It's already hard enough to find a match. So how do you think we can prevent alloimmunizing them to more HLA antigens? And so remember, the L stands for leukocyte. So these cancer patients, remember they get this pancytopenia, so they have decreased red cells and platelets because their bone marrow is filled up with cancer cells. So they're getting frequent transfusions, we learned that in hematology. What can we do to their platelets and red cells that they're gonna receive to prevent exposure to those white blood cells? Anybody remember what they do to the blood? They irradiate it. Oh, I'm so excited. Irradiate the blood. Irradiating the blood blood doesn't destroy the red cells or the platelets. So you can literally irradiate a unit of platelets or a unit of blood. It destroys most of the white blood cells. They don't make it through it. But the red cells, it does shorten the life of a unit of red cells a little bit. I think 28 days versus, I forgot, 50-something days maybe is the shelf life on a regular unit. Once you irradiate it, the shelf life is a little bit shorter because it affects the red cell membrane a little bit. But they're still good for like a month once they're irradiated, if they have at least a month left on their life, right?
What is deep frozen blood shelf life?
10 years, I think.
10 years.
That's when they add the glycerol, and it's like deep frozen. So the freezers that you're gonna use in the lab, probably like -30. It's like -100, I think. And we'll talk about, storage. There's like a whole chapter on storage and processing and stuff like that.
So we do that because they get a whole bunch of.
Yeah, and so every transfusion, and so you remember the red cells, they're leuko-reduced already, but you don't wanna take any chance on exposing them. So the cancer doctor, if they think they're a candidate for a transplant, as soon as they start getting transfused, they will order irradiated products. You'll get an order for an irradiated red blood cell or an irradiated platelet to prevent graft versus host disease. Graft versus host disease is almost always fatal, is what I read. So if they order an irradiated product, so most of the orders in the blood bank print out on a piece of paper. The rest of the orders in the lab, they're not on paper. They're trying to not have so much paper, right? Well, most of the time, I'm not saying every time, but most of the time, it'll print out a piece of paper. You take that piece of paper, and the first thing you do is go to the computer and look up the patient's history. You're looking to see what their blood type is, if they've been there before, if they have any antibodies ever, if they've ever had any antibodies. And usually the system is gonna be blinking at you or flashing at you, like they have an anti-E or whatever. You're gonna write as much information as you can find out about that patient on that piece of paper. And then you're gonna look for special requirements. Did they want it CMV negative? Do they want it irradiated? How many units do they want? Do they want platelets? Do they want red cells? Everything's important. I kept a highlighter in the blood bank because somebody missed something important one time. And so I made them start highlighting. There was a highlighter at every station. And if there was anything special on that order, you had to highlight it. After you did the history, you had to put your initials on it because somebody missed something important. Something that they shouldn't have missed. I don't know how they did it. It's FDA reportable if you make a mistake like that. There's lots of things in place to help you not make a mistake. You just have to read. You just have to read it. They missed it. The patient had been getting this special product for like a year. So we knew their name. When they looked it up in the computer to get the patient's history, it was blinking, like a yellow sun. It said it on the order. It was everywhere. When the patient the tech that actually issued the product, when they went to issue it, it was blinking. It told them too. Well, they trusted the person behind them, and so they sent the product on its way. They never thought twice about it. Everybody missed it. So, that's your lesson on paying attention to the order. If they order something special, you have to give it to them. If you don't have it, order it for the blood center. It's important. It could change the fact whether somebody's able to get their transplant or not. So, very important. Okay. These hematopoietic progenitor cell transplants can be obtained from bone marrow, peripheral blood, and cord blood. So you know how some mamas will store their cord blood? You'll hear the advertisement for the cord blood banking. That's what that means. So if the family has a history of getting these certain leukemias or whatever, or if they've had another kid that got a childhood leukemia, they may store the cord blood in case that kid needs a stem cell transplant later on in life. Costs money. I don't think it's cheap. And remember the lab that didn't have the monitored freezers and all of the samples went bad? So
Is that the one unplugged it, the cleaner?
I think so.
Like
When they did it on
unplugged it?
purpose. Yeah, I've heard of it happening on accident before too.
Well,
but I
not
forgot.
on her, well, yeah, they wanted the beeping to stop. So they went in and unplugged it,
Yeah, so if it was beeping, there was probably something wrong
like
with it.
decades worth of.
So in the blood bank, especially at nighttime, there may not always be a tech in the blood bank, they usually work with fewer people. And so the freezers are in there, if it's going off, you may not hear it. So all of the freezers will be connected to the mothership. I never got to see where that was, but there's an alarm that goes off in another place in the hospital where they're, like, that's probably the person that answers the phone at night or something. And so there's always somebody in that room. If you don't hear the alarm, within a minute, they're gonna call you and say, hey, did you know that your freezer was going off? They'll tell you which one, they can see it. Because it's FDA reportable if your blood products go out of temperature. And so you have to be close by, be able to pull them out of that freezer and put them in another one or something, so that they never go out of temp.
So if it's like that, then how did that person unplug
So that, they probably didn't even have somebody there at nighttime, that was probably some kind of
No,
like
they said that
research lab or something.
they only had like a sign, a paper sign on the door that said like, do not enter. They heard his beeping on the other side of the door.
So that beeping
They
meant something
opened
was
it.
probably wrong,
Right.
and it should have been ringing on somebody's phone at home or something, there should have been
Right.
somebody in the middle.
Yeah, there was an issue.
Obviously, there was not,
Yeah, and they just went in there and
So-
unplugged it.
anyways.
So,
You just go up.
So the main thing that I want you to know about this, okay, so the transplants. These stem cells can be used to treat diseases like aplastic anemia,